got the light from the projector in my face. Hi, my name is JoAnne. I'm with the library, and welcome to our first Eat Your Backyard session. We are so happy to have Superior Seed Savers here, so they're the ones that are going to be presenting. Tonight's topic is navigating seed catalogs. However, I know these folks will answer any of your burning gardening related questions, so you don't necessarily have to keep it just to this subject. Tell all your fellow gardeners, first Monday of every month, folks from Superior Seed Savers are going to be here, and we'll have a different topic each time. Okay? Yes?
When does it end?
We didn't pick tonight?
No,
We didn't pick an ending, so I'm hoping we'll go at least up until the summer and then see where we go from there. Maybe then we can hit them up for canning and preserving questions too. So I don't know. I gotta find somebody that does canning and preserving, because that's the question we get asked every year. For folks that haven't been before, that's an emergency exit. It is alarmed, so don't go out just for fun, but in an emergency, feel free. These doors are unlocked on that side that leads out to the fiction area. Public washrooms are right outside the door to your left, and there is a water fountain there as well. If you have any questions or you need me for anything, I'll be floating around out there. So enjoy yourselves. There's a handout on the back table for anyone who hasn't got one.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have fun.
Yeah, thanks for that introduction, Jana. First off, I think we put out sort of a late direction that people could bring their own seed catalogs, but for anyone who doesn't have a seed catalog, I'm going to hand these around, so we'll be looking at catalogs as we go. I don't know if there's enough for everybody, but to leave them up here. If you don't end up with a seed catalog in your hot little hands, all will be well. I'm super glad to see so many people out for our very first presentation. We do presentations from time to time in the community, but we've never done a series like this at the library before. So, and I can't remember the topics for February and March, but they're equally dynamic and interesting. But for this one, we figured we'd do seed catalogs first, because this is the time of year that you start thinking about, or at least I do. I think most other gardeners do start thinking about their garden wistfully, thinking about the season to come, and you start looking into the seed catalogs. I know more than one person who reads seed catalogs just for the pleasure of it, you know, not even analyzing or thinking what's going to be good in their garden. I know one fellow that calls it seed porn. I mean, you're just looking at those gorgeous pictures and enjoying the art of them, and enjoying the idea of maybe growing them in your garden. So, I just handed them around. If you need to swipe one back. Okay. So JoAnne, Henderson, and I'm Wendy O'Connor, by the way. We're going to switch back and forth. Some of the slides.
Oh, wait, I'm going to be concerned of everything.
Here, oh, no worries. Here, you can be a silhouette. Oh boy. Okay. So we'll switch back and forth. We picked out the slides we wanted to do. So, get our next slide going here. This is something that was just recently brought to my attention by someone in our group, and I forget who it was, but they said you have to realize when you look at a description in a seed catalog, actual people grew those seeds. There's a story behind every seed in the catalog. If it's a success story, it has appeared in the catalog with this beautiful photographs, and you can grow that seed. If it wasn't successful, you'll just see a little notice that says crop failure, which is something the catalog usually carries. But that's a disappointment for the grower that grew those. There's always a human story behind it. And in a way, that makes it more meaningful for us when we remember that. If you want to, or you might have this in mind already, I'd like to ask you maybe what are the top one or two things that you'd like to grow in your garden this year. If anyone wants to put up their hand and say what is in their imagination is something they'd like to grow. It can be something you've grown before, or just something you want to try growing. Is there anyone that wants to tell us?
cucumbers successfully.
Successfully. That last bit is important. Yep,
Spaghetti squash.
very good. We know that'll grow here, so you got a good chance. Others?
So you here?
Yep.
We could try a loofah that goes more than that high.
Is that how high it's grown for you? I've never tried that one.
It got that high and then it just went, I moved it and the plant just went.
That's disappointing. Some things don't transplant well, that's true. So the first three suggestions we've got, the cucumber, the loofah, and the spaghetti squash, they're all from the same family, the cucurbitas, which sounds suspiciously like cucumber. I don't eat. It's the general cucumber family that comprises cucumbers and squash. Anyone wanna try something different? A tomato, a pepper, a green? Oh, come on.
Okay, I'm gonna try peppers again this year too. Not too, I think I grew the wrong kind. I wanna grow bell pepper, but I've been looking into it.
Perfect. I know we have more to say during the presentation on all those vegetables. So,
How about peas?
good one. Yeah, a lot of people grow peas around Thunder Bay, but they have particular challenges with them. Mine always turn white and fall over. I'm not sure what's with that.
The squirrels eat mine as soon as they're 4 inches tall.
Not just squirrels, but have you ever had ravens or crows watch you planting and then come down and fall? Yeah, I heard some chuckles. Yeah, they're always watching you. So with that little introduction, I think the next slide is JoAnne's. Heritage varieties.
Does anybody here know what an heirloom plant is? Yes. You can tell us. Really? Yes?
No.
Sorry, I should say Lois.
Come on, JoAnne. They're usually open pollinated, generally speaking. It's a plant that's been around for a long time. It's not brand new, and it's been tried over and over and over again. It can be a cross mixture in order to create something new, which then becomes an heirloom. Non-hybrid seeds, generally speaking.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah, you made one really good point there, and that's that, just because it's an heirloom plant, and because it's open pollinated, and we'll go back into that a little bit more, that doesn't mean they can't be hybridized, they can't be crossed, and some people do that because they don't wanna have to keep planting two separate varieties. But before we get to that, what Lois said is correct. Way before the Second World War, farmers in individual counties or villages across the world, really, their seed saving community was quite small, and it depended on the environment, the climate that they had. So they would have particular requirements for success of their plants, of the crops. And so as they kept growing these, they would slowly develop a kind of plant. In this case, we're looking at, say, a Romano bean that did very well in that particular area, but there's other places in the world too. And so those plants became identified with the particular location where they were being grown. And because they were so successful, they kept on being grown. And after, as time moved on, like some farmers would choose one that was either a yellow one, and others would choose ones that were green, and they have particular varieties that they would prefer to use, but they still were called Romano beans, and they could cross with each other, but they didn't because farmers had them on their own farms. So you have people saving in a whole general area, then you have a particular type of bean or a plant that is suitable for growing in that area because it has the characteristics or the genetics it's adapted to that climate. And they've been growing them for decades and years, centuries, whatever. And it used to be said that an heirloom plant was at least 50 years old. Now, some companies, that was when I started. Now, some companies say that, they have to be over 100 years old, which means I've been saving seeds for over 50 years, which is pretty embarrassing, but anyway. But the idea being that it's an open pollinated plant as well, because these people save the seeds, they didn't actually breed them. Like, they selected for seeds that were were appropriate for the climate that they had, that would do well for them, and had, for the kind of culture they had, for the kind of cooking that they did, they selected seeds that were good for that. So that's why we call them heirloom, because they were passed on down from generation to generation, from parents, grandparents, to the kids, to their offspring, and throughout the community. As opposed to, I don't have to say that, because we'll go into that at another time. We're gonna talk about open pollinated this type of section later on, but anyway. Well, those are seeds that are basically open pollinated. If you're saving seeds, those are the kind of seeds that you want to plant. You don't want to plant hybrid seeds because they have already been crossed. And we can talk about that a little bit more as well. But the open pollinated ones are reliably true to what you plant is what you'll get. You know, when, if you save seeds and plant them the next year. So it's an old way of saving seeds, an old way of planting.
So that's one of the things you'll see in your seed catalogs or online or on a seed packet. Sometimes you'll see that it says heritage seeds, so that's why we wanted to touch on that, what that actually is. And as JoAnne says, if you plant heirloom seeds or heritage seeds, you will get the same thing the next time, unless it has crossed with another variety of the same species in your garden, which is another thing that we'll cover. And that just produces something that's in between the two. Another thing that you'll see on seed listings and in your seed catalog is days to maturity. And that's something to watch, especially if you're picking out from a rack in the hardware store, for instance, where that line of seeds, say it's Ontario Seed Company or one of those lines of seeds, Mackenzie's, many of those seeds are perfectly good for our climate, but it's a selection for Ontario as a whole. So some of those won't have time to mature in our northern gardens. So the way to try and figure it out starts with the number of frost-free days we have around Thunder Bay, which is, depending on what map you look at, what is it, 100, 110 days or so on average. So when you consider planting your seed, the time it takes to germinate and come up if you're direct seeding into your garden, and then the number of days after that until the frost, if it's something that you plant directly like a bean, and you're usually good with beans, but you'd want that to be, you know, somewhat less than 100 days then. Most beans are 60 or 70 days and you're fine. But where it gets tricky actually is squash, because there's so many squash that are around 110, 120 days, some of them 130. You can get away with some of those if you grow them inside for a bit and transplant them out. Then they've got maybe a week or two's growth inside, you planted them out, they've got a bit of a head start. And then you just cross your fingers for a nice warm fall. Maybe a nice warm spring too, so they don't catch any frost. But, so what you'll see in the seed catalog is days to maturity. And sometimes they abbreviate that to DTM. And since we're a seed savers group, we always give a few words to if you're saving the seeds from a crop. You may need a few more days after that, because you're not just going for, say, the vegetable to be mature, but you're going for the seeds to be ready to harvest. So if that's a bean, for instance, it's not just a nice juicy bean that you would pick, but it's gonna take another few weeks for that to dry down and have the seeds rattling inside. Oftentimes, if you're up against the end of the season, you can harvest those and hang them up inside and let them mature, depending on the plant, and that's worth a whole nother talk. So I can't get into that too much, but if you're saving seeds, you might need to buy a little bit more time. But you can't get around that days to maturity. I think we've all done that. I've done tomatoes that are main crop tomatoes in southern Ontario, where they have a lot more time to play with. and you end up with the little bean tomatoes in September, and they just can't go any further, and the frost kills them. So onions, similar thing. A lot of them are in the neighborhood of 110 days. A few varieties are around 90. There's one that I grow called Cartier, and there's one called North Star that you'll find in the hardware store. Very good onions to grow in our short growing season. You know, you can't speed them up, no matter what you do. I wish we could. But if you keep an eye on that, you won't be caught short in the fall. The other thing to keep an eye on is growing directions. And just like many of you, I've tried to cheat on that as well, especially when you don't have a lot of garden space. I used to garden in a very small space. I have a number of acres now, and I'm extremely lucky, but I used to have a 10 by 10 garden behind a townhouse, so I was trying to do a lot with a little. And you can absolutely do a lot with a little, but certain crops take more room than you think. And I had a couple in mind with the growing directions. I think this is covered on another slide too, about the space you need to leave between them. Some of the vegetables are bigger than you would think, but on this slide, I've got soil types and drainage. And again, every one of these topics could be a whole talk in itself, but the soil types around here are extremely varied. Some people have sand, water runs through the sand, you have to put on a lot of manure or fertilizer to keep that fertility in there. Tended for, many years in some cases to build up some fertility in that soil because the water runs through it, but you'll never have problems with too much moisture on sand, so there's always a balance. The best thing that you can have, and actually there's quite a lot of this raised around here in Fort William, if you live around the library here, is nice sandy or silty loam. And the loam part of it suggests a blend of the different soil types, the clay and the silt and the sand, and a bit of organic matter in there. And Fort William has a lot more earth than Port Arthur, which in some cases has very little, although I know some people have very good gardens in Port Arthur, so, and some people do raised gardens when they don't have a lot of soil. But if you look in the seed catalog, sometimes it'll make suggestions for which soil type vegetable wants. Peas, for instance, grow very well on sand. And what do you think would grow particularly well on clay? I know a lot like sand, but
Do you speak of pea variety or some other?
any vegetable.
Clay can be quite nutritious, like it's got a lot of nutrients in it, but if it's not, it's really dense, and so it holds moisture well, but some plants, such as carrots, can't get the roots down deep, like they just end up being shallow, so some of the seed catalogs will suggest, that they are short, they're compact, stubby root or whatever, meant to be grown in clay soils, because they really just don't grow any longer. And if you have one that is supposed to be growing, it's supposed to be longer, if you grow it in clay soil, it's just gonna be short anyway, so might as well choose one that is good for clay. Beets are another one.
Oh, yeah.
They do well, but they tend to pop out of the soil when the soil is too heavy, and there's too much clay, but.
I was gonna say, in some of the catalogs, and they're getting better at it, when you're talking about carrots, they just used to say gnats or, whatever of the carrots, but they wouldn't explain the soil type, so people were getting frustrated, thinking that they were growing, gonna have a nice long one, and their soil is not gonna allow it, or the tomato, or the carrot itself is gonna be short regardless, because that's the kind of carrot it is, where they're now starting to say clay, loam, sand, so that people, especially somebody that's not 100% sure, or not had success and say, I'm never growing carrots again.
Yeah.
They're always short and squat, or you maybe growing the wrong carrot, or they're starting to put that in some of the different catalogs now.
That's really, really helpful.
Yeah,
to know.
it makes a big difference in a lot of seeds.
I can think of one off the top of my head that likes clay soils, and that's cold crops, cabbages, broccolis, cauliflowers, rapini.
Yeah.
I think that is partly because of the nutrients that are in clay. It just, it has an absorptive character, and it holds on to all kinds of nutrients, especially minerals, that will make your, if you manage to grow your vegetables in the clay, you'll be rewarded with better flavor and better nutrition than on a sand bed. So,
maybe it doesn't fit with the seed discussion, but potatoes do really well in clay.
They do, it's true.
Yeah, I've got fairly heavy soil on parts of my place, and I put the potatoes on the heavier parts that some of the other vegetables would have trouble contending with. Also, if you're starting a new garden and it's kind of rough and you know, clods of earth, and you just haven't got it beautiful yet, plant potatoes in it for a season. You'll get a good crop, and it'll help to tame down your earth a little bit. So, the other thing I've got here in my lightning round, so to speak, is sun exposure, and it's a simpler topic than soils. Your descriptions of how to grow the seeds will almost always include how much sun exposure it wants, and that will almost always say that it wants full sun for a vegetable. I know it is possible to grow some vegetables with a little bit of shade, tomatoes, peppers, etc., and some greens can have, you know, 2 or 3 hours of shade, but the more sun they get, the happier they're going to be. Can you think of any vegetables that like a little bit less sun? Because off the top of my head, I know they'll tolerate some of them, but.
Well, potatoes can take a little less sun.
Cool.
But you're right, like the cabbage, cole crops, grow quite well with anything that has to have a blossom on it. Really does need sun, because if you're gonna have pollinators coming in to pollinate those flowers and that's what's needed for producing the fruit of the plant, then, being in the sun, the more sun they get is better, so.
I think some of the leafy plants can tolerate a little bit of shade, spinach and lettuce.
Yeah.
Some plants even get a bit of a sunburn if conditions are really extreme, so a little shade on your spinach is okay. Yeah, Wendy?
I find that, you know, with climate change, the temperature is, the sun and the heat do a real number on the plants, and so when you get some shade, it helps, because it's sometimes so hot if you bury them. I know they need sun, but sometimes the intensity of the sun is.
It's absolutely true, yeah, it's a matter of getting to know your garden. You know, if you garden for a few years, and hopefully you persevere, because we all go through these steps of learning how to use our gardens, you'll find which, you know, how the crops are responding to the bright sun and whatnot. I know a fellow who had a really interesting setup with his broccoli. He was on a country property, and he had just dug a well, and he's a guy that just loves his broccoli. And so he had his broccoli, and it was wilting in the sun, and he had his well, which is a fairly deep well. The water coming out of it was ice cold. So every afternoon, he'd turn on his pump and spray his broccoli with ice cold water. And did he ever grow broccoli? But most of us can't do that. So.
I could add something, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Something like, if the temperature gets to be too hot, too high, then some vegetables won't set fruit. And I don't know exactly why, whether the pollen degrades early on, or whether the insects don't, come to the flowers, but we ran into that when we were growing the tomatoes, that they grow at a certain point, and then you'd have like maybe 2 feet where there were no blossoms at all, like the blossoms just all fell off, nothing got fertilized, and they would coincide with the days where it's up in the high 90s, like in Fahrenheit, high 90s. And then everybody that we talked to, they had the same thing, like you just have this whole band in and this is like for, full, like indeterminate tomatoes that we would have trellised or on stakes, and you just have this whole band that didn't have any fruit on it, and then they pick up again. So
It was uncanny.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, but Dodie's right, that's gonna come on more with climate change, just because we get more extreme swings. So, you know, it is glorious in a way when the temperature gets above 90 Fahrenheit outside, but you'll notice it's quiet. The insects have all found some shade, nothing's out in that temperature, so things aren't getting pollinated, and that might be the key to it.
So what some people might choose to do is use a shade cloth of some sort, and just, either gauze or mosquito netting or something like that, and just, you don't wanna change the amount of light too much, but it's amazing how much, even a sheet, like on sticks over whatever, will give enough shade for a short period of time in the afternoon that the temperature drops enough that the plants don't get totally stressed, so.
Did I see a hand for a second? I thought someone raised their hand.
Especially in the hot sun on the farm, that's what I use, is shade cloth, very fine spun stuff, on poles.
Yeah.
And on top of the poles, I take out a clay, flower pot, turn it upside down, fill that hole in so that otherwise it shade cloth will just get pulled through, cause birds seem to think that's a good place to hide too. And then take it off, leave it on for maybe 2 hours when it's the hottest,
Yeah.
sunniest part of the day, and then take it off, and you seem to be fine. Or also companion planting, where you've got taller plants and then the shorter ones that can handle a bit more, need more shade or whatever, tucked down in a row in between or something. Sometimes helps, not always, but it's worth a,
Worth a try,
sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
that sounds like a great idea, and the cloth,
yeah,
yeah, I wish
I
I
find it
had the
worked really good.
concentration.
yeah.
But I know people do that kind of thing with great success, so
Mhm.
every suggestion is a good one. Yeah, I think the next slide is JoAnne's. You'll see in catalogs sometimes information about diseases and pests of your vegetables. We don't want those, so JoAnne will help us with some advice.
Well, I'm not gonna give it all that, he's wonderful, but anyway, a couple of the catalogs that are going around, particularly John's, they have a lot of information about, if you look in the abbreviations, like it's fusarium millet resistance, powdery mildew resistance, other kinds of resistance, blight resistance or whatever. If you know anything about, what is prevalent in the area that you're growing, where your garden is, you can, try to buy seed or buy plants that will, have some kind of resistance. And several varieties do, it's not every plant, every species, every genus is, uniformly susceptible or resistant to, it varies, depending on the way that the plants have evolved. For instance, strange story, and don't worry about this too much, okay, just wanna give you a little heads up. I've been watching some gardening videos, yes, and if you watch videos of people that are gardening in the south, in southern states, they have every bug and every pest and every disease that you can imagine, like rodents, everything is in there, and
Lizards.
oh, and it's amazing, they just have to deal with this, and after watching that video, I thought, we are so lucky, because we think that we have so many bugs in our garden, but it's so few compared to some of the other parts of the world, so. We actually are very lucky where we are. There are some garden pests that are moving north. Earweeds are one that comes to my mind very quickly, but there's some other ones. But for every pest that you're gonna have, or every disease that you're gonna have in your garden, there is a way to hopefully deal with it. And I say hopefully because sometimes it's just hand picking up things. Might have a new garden, and many new gardens don't have things like carrot maggot or potato beetles or all these things, but eventually they will move into a garden. Once they know that there's stuff growing there that they can feed on, they just kind of tend to move in. So like say the first 3 years of a garden are kind of like the beauty years, and then after that, the honeymoon's over. So if you can, and if you know your garden well enough, you can look for plants that have those kinds of resistances, but there are other ways that you can look at it too, and that's companion plants, just so many ways that's another couple of talks, all on their own. There's so many ways that you can plant a garden. So yeah, some of the books have disease resistance in them, but that's only if you are growing on large crop and you're perhaps depending on an income from it or whatever, then you will be choosing plants for sure that, if you can, that have disease resistance. In your first year, if you tend to lose something, then you rotate your crops so that you plant in a new spot in the garden in years after that, because you might not have that particular garden pest or that disease in that part of your garden. Another thing is that it depends on the weather, on the season. You can have everything prepared for the best possible yield and protection from insects and everything else, and then you have wet weather and everything becomes, it's covered in fungus and things, so it's, and customers love it wet,
Okay, I give up.
No, so don't overthink disease and pest resistance, like, just choose a plant, choose a variety that you want to grow for your first time gardening or whatever. Do the one, you want the ones that are gonna work in your garden, when they work, that are gonna work, will give you what you want. And then after that, you deal with other things.
I think also plant what you like to eat.
Oh, for
When
sure.
you're starting off particularly, you'll
Yeah.
have more success than if you're trying 50,000 things and you know you're never gonna eat 40,000 of them.
Yeah.
You can't stand them and you don't know why you put the seeds in them. Put your energy into what you really wanna have out of it.
That's a good point. And the thing is, if those are the plant foods that you like, then you know what to expect in the flavor of what you planted too. Like when they start, when you start to mature, so. Well, that's about it. On that one.
Yeah.
I guess there's a few other things in there, but.
Yeah, I'll just add, as JoAnne said, some of the catalogs, I think Johnny's and Stokes in particular, they also serve commercial growers, so that's one of the reasons that they list a lot of stuff about disease resistance. But most of us don't need to worry about it all. The only ones that I've found useful in my garden, if the catalog listed them, were powdery mildew and squash. They get little white marks on the leaves, and the leaves go all brown and crinkly. I don't know if there's any varieties that actually resist that, but some varieties that actually don't get it. I guess there's just some varieties are tolerant to it, so they'll get a little bit of spots, but the leaves won't necessarily get green and crinkly. They'll just look a bit spotty. So if you see that in Johnny's or Stokes, you think, is that any use? Yeah, powdery mildew resistance is useful. That's squash and cucumbers that are usually listed that way. And the other one is tomatoes. There's early blight, there's late blight, there's probably any number of blights. Any kind of blight resistance is usually a good thing. If you list that for tomatoes. The other ones, it's a whole study. Oh my goodness, plant diseases and pests. Don't even talk to me about cutworms. I think the last thing in the specifics about seed listings was growth habit. And that's relevant to a couple of different things, especially squash. Have I got the right one? I'm on species. I'm looking for growth habit. We'll go back one. Disease resistance. Here. Drawing direction. Disease resistance.
Number 6.
Growth habit there. Somehow it's skipping. Yeah, in tomatoes, I think most catalogs will list this. They'll say it's a determinate variety or an indeterminate variety. And that simply means you could also say a determinate variety is a bush tomato. They grow about 3 or 4 feet tall. Once each individual little branch on them gets blossoms, that branch stops growing and it stops growing taller. They tend to bear all of their fruit within a short period, which can be handy if you're making sauce and that kind of thing. Even though they're called a bush tomato, as we know, they do tend to subside and be kind of a mound tomato. But it's good to know because then you know how much space you need to leave in your garden for that tomato. If it's an indeterminate tomato, they'll get vines, and either you need to have some way of training those vines or leave room on the ground for the vines to trail along their own. And that's gonna take more space. And similar with squash, a lot of newer varieties, and especially a lot of the zucchinis, have a bush growing habit. So again, they grow in a mound. Maybe you leave a couple of feet on either side for your little mounds of zucchini. Some of the older summer squash and most of the winter squash make vines need a little bit more space, or some people train them up on trellises with a very good effect. I've never done that. I let them trail on the ground, but then the leaves are more susceptible to powdery mildew, so there you go, training them is good. And then the real kicker, and this is a mistake that I've made, is the cabbage family. Because if you're in the farmer's market and you get yourself a nice bunch of broccoli or a nice cauliflower, there it is, like a brain, it's not very big. You don't imagine how big the plant is that the cauliflower comes on, but it's about that big around. A cauliflower plant is massive. So you're planting your little seedlings, dump, 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 dump. You need to leave at least 4 feet between cauliflower, and you might still need to thin it. And broccoli is similar. Cabbage, not so much, but again, a cabbage with all its leaves kind of laid out the way they grow, is at least 2 to maybe 3 feet across. So cool crops can surprise you. You don't want to overcrowd because it's a waste of seed. So that's growth kind of it. I think species is yours. Yes.
One thing I'm gonna add, which is kind of under seedless and specifics too, is. You there now? I'm in number 8. Alright. Oh, I'm doing that too. Okay. With the tomatoes and some of these that vine, like pole peas, pole beans, indeterminate tomatoes, they tend to produce for a longer season. So with the bush types, you get all of your produce at once, and then you're just overwhelmed with canning, freezing, doing whatever. With the indeterminate and the ones that usually have to be trellised, or you can put tie them in strings to whatever, they will produce right until frost. You know, until the weather gets too cold for them to be pollinated, really. And then you end up with a bunch of green fruit that you can bring in, but it's kind of a slower, a more gradual production over a longer period of time, and you're not completely overwhelmed with produce that you don't know what to do with. So it all depends on how you like to do your canning or your eating or whatever, you know. Which actually brings me back to another one that I didn't mention earlier, and that's one of the things about open pollinator plants. I don't want to jump all over the place too much. Is there's enough diversity in the plants that they don't all ripen at the same time. They don't all germinate at the same time either. So they have different rates of growth, even though it's the same variety. And what that allows you to do is something along the lines of, between having a bush variety and a pole variety, the ripening period is over a bit longer time. So you're not stuck with having everything ready at once. The other thing about them is that if you have, say you planted your carrots, or say you planted your peas, sorry, excuse me, and we get a period of cold, wet weather, some of the less adapted crops, the seed will just rot in the ground. But if you have, say with open pollinated variety, there's always a chance that some of those seeds are going to be, they're going to make it, like because they have the genes that are needed to withstand cold soil. And new open pollinated varieties have been developed from these because our soil conditions are so different, from area to area. So it's nice that the open pollinated plants, if say there's hail, and you've got some plants that are mature and ready to go, they get destroyed. The other ones that haven't actually made it that far yet, they will still come along. So you're going to get something out of your garden, as opposed to if you have a crop that matures all at the same time and it all gets hit by hail, and then you have nothing. So that's just something to remember about open pollinated versus hybrid varieties. So here we are looking at species, and we're going to focus on squash. And if you look in the books again, 3 different species of squash, the 3 main species are pepo, maxima, and machata. And the pepos are what we consider acorn squash, zucchini, spaghetti squash, some others in that having that same shape, but also there are some that you would think would be in a different species, like pie pumpkins, are also pepos. So you can get confused. So when you are looking at seed catalogs and you want to, you're looking at the squash, if you pick all your selections in the same species, such as pepo, you're going to have them cross like crazy. You can't save seeds from them. You might have something that looks like a nice spaghetti squash one year, you save the seeds from it and you plant it out and you get everything under the sun, and none of it tastes good. Zumpkins.
Very common.
But there are some that, you know, if they do cross, it's not too bad. You know, like some people don't mind planting, say spaghetti squash, not spaghetti squash, acorn squash and delicata squash, for instance, because they do taste, they have a similar taste anyway. But anyway, so you want to, if you want to be able to save your seed, and have something that looks like what you planted that year, then only plant one variety of each. So you can still have 3 different varieties of squash in your garden. You can have one summer squash, or one petal, one maxima, which is the winter squash that we often see, which are buttercup, cherry, like nice orange shaped ones. Some are flat, you know, they have different shapes, but you know, they have, they're another species. They're the ones that we commonly grow for winter squash. And machado, which is the one that we are most familiar with, are the butternut squashes. So, so just remember that you can plant 3 squash. They will never cross. There have been reports that some have crossed, but they're so rare. But you can comfortably plant one of each variety in your garden, and you will get. They'll leave each other alone. So,
No fighting.
Yeah, no fighting. So that's one. Another one is corn. If you want to plant corn crosses even easier than squash. Squash is insect pollinated, so it relies on having insects to move from flower to flower. Corn is wind pollinated. If you have 2 varieties that are even remotely close together, then the wind, like the pollen, gets mixed between the 2, and you will have a different kind of corn. You might not be able to tell that it's different unless unless you have like 2 different colors. So if you have a blue corn and a yellow corn, those are one of the few vegetables that you can tell that it's crossed in the first year, because when you open up the cob, you have mixed colors of corn. If you're growing, say, a popcorn, you want a popcorn, and you also want to have sweet corn. If they cross, you're going in the first year, corn that you have that's sweet corn, as you try to nibble it, you're going to have some hard kernels in there that are not going to be fun to eat. So you want to keep them separate too. So corn is another iffy one that you have to be careful about. And we really only care, no, I don't want to say it quite like that, but we really only care, yes?
How far apart can things be where it doesn't matter? So like if you planted one one, how far apart?
Good question.
That is a really good question.
If you have a lot of land, you could just like really separate them, but at what point?
Well, there are, in the seed books, and there should be, not necessarily in this book, but the one that you got, that Seeds Diversity, at the back of the book, it's got a listing of how far apart the seeds should be. But you know, it's so, only if you're trying to sell seed do you have to have that minimum distance. If you're wanting to save seed and you're willing to take, and you just don't have room, there are several ways that you can get away with it. You know, like a row of trees in one spot, plant, you know, one variety and the other variety. So, because the chances are the pollinators are not gonna wanna go through a thicket, through a hedge, you know, or a fence. So there are other ways that you can manage to plant. You put one on one side of the house, one on the other side of the garage, something like that, if you really want to try and save seeds from them.
Another one is like corn. If the farmer beside us plants corn for feed for their cows, can we plant regular corn? Like, is there sort of a similar thing with squash as there is to corn with that drastic of a change, or is all the corn going to mix?
It's gonna mix.
Okay.
One of the possible problems with that, and Wendy, I'm gonna ask you to help me, and that's that, GM crops are usually for agriculture, like for large productions, so there might be a very slight possibility that you have some kind of modified crop growing in your neighbor's cornfield. So it would be a really good idea if you are comfortable enough to ask that farmer, what variety of corn they're growing.
Okay, that's.
Yeah, and the other thing is that, if you're both growing hybrids, you can really can't save seed from the menu, like whether it's a GM crop or not, because they're gonna cross and not produce really good seed, so if you can put the corn someplace, it helps, you know.
The wind pollinated crops are really difficult for, the distances you need to leave to prevent them from crossing. I mean, because it's the wind, and that's, I think it was spinach out west that, was it spinach? Pollinated on the wind, so there are, no, it was beets.
Beets
It's
are the
beets,
big one,
yeah,
yeah.
beets are a big one. With the genetically modified crops, there's a concern that we will no longer have access to, seed stock that's non-genetically modified, because the pollen of any beet travels so far that, and, you know, how big of a practical problem is that? Well, kind of remains to be seen, but we don't like to lose access to things that we once had access to just on principle. So, yeah, wind pollination, but again, it only matters if you're saving seed. It doesn't affect the crop that you're eating the first year, so.
I know in particular, Monsanto has had a couple of lawsuits with farmers
Absolutely.
side by side and having cross-contamination, and then believing that the farmer had planted their patented seeds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They can be a problem.
Yeah, patents is another thing. We got into GMOs right at the end of the presentation, but, again, it's a topic that could take up a few talks.
And it's a little bit different from patents. Patents aren't necessarily GMOs, they're ones that have been bred very deliberately to give certain characteristics. But one of the things out west, just to be off topic, just show you the magnitude of the problems, say with beets, because sugar beets are also grown. They're grown for making sugar, obviously, but there are huge maps that are put out, and these beets, like it's kind of like a lottery. The farmers choose, or put in their names, those that wanna grow beets, and they submit them, and then names are chosen, and only farmers that are grown like a radius, like that proper proper distance apart, and the distances are huge, they're the only ones that can grow the beets, because the chances of them crossing are so great. So it's, I don't know if it's exactly done by lottery, but it is almost like getting a deer tag in some ways. I don't know how to say it, but the maps are vast.
It was controlled by a board, right? So,
Yeah.
and then the board would select certain property patches, right, that were acceptable.
Yeah, that's a good point, yeah. I mean, it is, I mean, we have boards too, like Canadian Wheat Board, things like that, you know, they do have a lot of power, so, anyway. So, yeah, okay, I think I have, oh yes, we did mention that insect pollinated plants, don't have to be planted as far apart, that's what Wendy said, as wind pollinated, because sometimes you get away with covering them, wind is something else, so.
I have to say, even with the insect pollinated ones, what JoAnne said about the people varieties of squash, the pumpkins and the zucchinis and the summer squash and the acorns and all of those belong to the same species, and because I save seeds, I'll only grow one in that species every season. And my next door neighbors, which are half a kilometer away, don't grow a garden at all, so the nearest garden is at least a kilometer, and I've still ended up with seeds that weren't what they started as. Some bee was very ambitious and came from over a kilometer away through the woods. But, again, only matters if you're saving the seeds, and only really matters if you're selling the seeds and you want that breed to be reliable.
Another thing though, that you might encounter is that if you were buying from, commercial producers aren't infallible. And so if, for instance, Queen Anne's lace gets into a field, sometimes you're gonna buy, carrot seeds that give you white carrots, like, and that's not what you did, it's the way that the, crop is grown. Same thing with you, with getting something that's not, the genes are there, like the genetics are in that particular one, it's just that they're not being expressed, until you say seed.
Yep.
Or room, so, yeah, so it's, there's always room for little surprises.
Yeah,
in a
you can
grow.
call it, complicated and techy, or you can call it magic.
Yeah.
I prefer the magic, epigenetics.
Oh, I remember one time I grew corn and I was, it wasn't a cross, but it's like, when I opened up the cobs, the colors were just so beautiful. My kids couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, because I was like, oh my God, like, cleaning corn, and then I'm like, oh, something's wrong with mom.
Crazy.
Anyway, so let's go to section 8. Good, yes. Okay, so we talked a little bit about open pollinated plants, and they're ones that have been bred from the same parents. They, just say you've got A and A together, like, you know, they've all been grown together, and when they cross with each other and they produce more A. So what you're gonna get when you're saving seeds, this is actually for seed saving, you're gonna get something that's similar, and there might be minor variations just because of the genetics of the plant, but you're gonna get something that's almost reliably true to what you planted. There's been a lot of talk about open pollinated plants because some of the older plants, the effort to keep things pure has been so great that they're starting to decline a bit because they don't have the genes for certain resistances. So if you have a friend that's got the same variety of carrot that you have and got it from a different source, then combine your carrots and grow them together and let them grow side by side. You'll get a lot better production. But open pollinated plants are the only ones that you can save seeds from because you do get the same offspring from them. On the other hand, hybrid seed comes from, see, the commercially produced, it's a very deliberate process that involves selection of parents that have 2 different varieties that have really specific characteristics, and they're bred so that other unwanted characteristics are depressed, so they're not, and then they are combined together into a hybrid with the product that with the characteristics that you want, and that's what happens when you plant them out that year, because that is the first year they've been combined, you have what's known as hybrid vigor. So the plants do really, really well because that's the first selection for these characteristics that the company wants you to buy. And along with that hybrid vigor though, there's often a chance that the seeds that are produced are not going to be viable for one thing, but they're not going to be as vigorous as what you originally got from the company. Some companies say will not let you save their seed. Monsanto is one of them. If you look in a seed catalog, there are some that PRS, anyway, you can tell there's a abbreviation side saying that you cannot save the seed. So that's something you have to be careful about. But then that's only with, nope, I can't say that's only with hybrid seed. If it's a new variety and it's patent protected, then you can't save the seed from it. So be careful about that. Yes?
And in the greenhouse, when you have to be really careful on that, what you're doing, because the inspectors come around, and you don't know they're the inspector, and they're just wandering through as if they're just a regular shopper in that, they can pick them out. And if you don't have the license for them, let me tell you, the fines are through the roof, and they can shut you down, and massive amount of trouble's gonna happen. For the individual that's trying that, they don't have the same leeway, because they can say, well, I didn't know, or I wasn't aware, or whatever, and they usually aren't gonna go to somebody's yard, but they will go to a farm.
Yeah.
That is especially taking stuff to market and that. So it's a very fine line in a lot of ways. I wouldn't recommend even trying to save them myself from being in the greenhouses and that, but Yeah.
But there are people that go to the store and pick up peppers and surprisingly, the seed germinates and
Mhm.
like it's a pepper that they like really well and nobody's gonna stop
Can't
me
do
from doing
anything
that.
about that, no.
Nope, so,
Same with the tomatoes
yeah,
and stuff
So-
like that.
They're not worried about us little people. yet.
No, not, but I mean, in the greenhouse industry,
Mhm. Yeah.
that should be a
Absolutely.
biggie, for sure, and it's very expensive
Oh, yeah.
if you, you know, I mean, no
Yeah.
greenhouse nowadays would be dumb enough to even try it, I'm sure, but Lord knows, you know, what they might do some of them.
I think most steer clear of it, but there's still lots of choices outside of
Oh,
those
yeah.
varieties.
Yeah.
But, you know, the worry is that more and more will come under patents, et cetera, so.
And they're trying to
something we
launch
will-
it under patent.
and the other thing about hybrids, sorry Louis,
That's okay.
about commercially produced hybrids is that they rely on fertilizers.
Mhm.
They're not designed to be able to use, I know it sounds, I won't say complicated, it sounds like, I don't know what the word is, you know, it's not like they can't use what's in the soil, it's just that they need more of whatever is being provided for them, the fertilizer that's being provided for them to grow. So that's another reason why you have hybrid bigger, because the plants utilize, but then you're stuck with buying the fertilizers and buying the seed again, so that's an issue with that.
Or they're formulated to withstand certain pesticides like Roundup Ready corn.
Which is what, yeah, that's
Yeah.
probably happens.
Just
most
another
times.
twist.
Anyway, so that's, one, you know, I mean, there's nothing wrong with growing them, really, I mean, if this is something that is good.
Okay, so when you say, GMOs are reserved for commercial crops,
Mhm.
so when we buy peppers or we buy tomatoes in whatever store, are they GMO'd or no? Are they
Supposedly
GMO
not.
products?
There's a question about corn, because of being wind pollinated, and how close it grows to, other feed.
So
Acorns.
the peppers and the tomatoes are not GMO products?
Not supposedly, because we're not supposed
I
to.
think they could be, yeah.
Pardon?
I think they could be. I think in Canada, they don't have to be labeled. In the EU, they have to be labeled, I'm pretty sure, unless I'm wrong, that in Canada, there isn't a requirement to label GMO food.
Okay.
And if you're buying, corn syrup and cornstarch, for instance, you probably are getting the products of genetically modified corn in North America. That's what I understand.
Yeah.
And the second part to the question is you said, you know, people could have taken pepper seeds or tomato seeds and grown plants from them. Can we do that generally? Even though they've gone through refrigeration and all that, so we can do that?
Some people try, yes, I've got a variety that I, picked up
That's
in,
right, you haven't, Dodie.
I know, I don't know why I haven't thought that.
like, on my first jalapeno pepper, I was from buying peppers at the store, and I guess one of the things that helped me was that if the seeds germinated so well, I guess it wasn't a hybrid. You know, like it did well, you know, it just acted like a regular one. If I was trying to plant something and none of the seeds germinated, or very few of the seeds germinated, I'd be kind of maybe glad it didn't happen, so.
With your tomatoes, what you can do, because some people find it difficult, so
Oh, go ahead, no,
Sorry,
go ahead, I'm going to, so.
sometimes people find it very difficult to save tomato seeds because there's a process to save the seed, you know, in the water and the whole 9 yards. What you can do is you can take a tomato that you really like, which means try various tomatoes. And it may take you a whole summer of trying various tomatoes in markets and wherever and asking what kind it is. You take one of those tomatoes, you slice it, sit it on your dirt, put some dirt on top, and let it go. And then you pick out the little wee seedlings, and you can go from there, and you will get that tomato. And that's,
Very cool.
and you can do it with celery. I have celery growing right now, that, you leave this much at the bottom, you cut the top off, you put the bottom part in water, it gets roots in it, and I plant that directly into my, gardens, and I get celery. And I let some of them go to seed as well. So there's other ways of sort of getting around, you know, some of the issues that may come up, but they're very simple to do, and it's good to do with little ones, because then they get to see what's happening, you know.
And that's, basically exactly what seeding is for biennials.
Yeah.
The top, you cut the tops off the celery, plant it in dirt,
Mhm.
leave it in the dark for the winter, and then plant it out in spring. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really good idea though. Thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah, cool. My celery was this time, and I let one of them go to seed, but I used all the leaves. And they made celery sauce and various things with the leaves when they dried and that, so, cool, just a little, protect things to dry.
Yeah, no, sure. So the second kind of hybrid seed is one that many of us do, and that's an unintentional crossing, or it can be an intentional crossing of your open pollinated plants, so of your open pollinated tomato, or your open pollinated, look here, my brain just went, peas, they're not really all that easy to cross, so open pollinated, cucumbers, okay. Because you like certain characteristics of both, but you don't have room in your garden to plant both and keep them completely separate, so why keep them separate? Just do a hybrid, and you're gonna get a mixture of both kinds, but eventually you're gonna get something that's more of a mixture than what, and they often come out to be, more vigorous than the other ones, because that's another kind of hybrid vigor that you get, so. And that's how new varieties are produced. Some things won't cross, they're very hard to cross, because they just kind of like keep them to themselves. But some corn, great, I've got 2 varieties of corn in my garden. One is tall, one is short. They're a week apart, they both taste great, I love them both. But why do I want to plant one year and one the other, or in separate gardens, when I could just plant both of them together? And you can tell that I've got them short and tall. And I'm getting more and more seed from them, but it seems to be easier for me to do that than try and keep them separate all the time. So it's just something that some gardeners do, because it makes life a little bit easier, gardening a little bit easier. And so we have one more 3 things to look at. As I said, the garden produce or garden seeds have not to this point been GMO. They've been kept out of home gardens, and I think there's a spot, maybe home garden says take action, you can purchase seeds, but also on the page on the other side, I believe it says something about changes in the regulations about how this is, what's happening. But anyway, yeah, I'm gonna show you that. But the main thing to look at is this Bayer's to launch GM non-mustardy mustard greens. They're not even calling them GM. So you're gonna be looking, you might be looking, and they're coming to Canada. Like the plan is to release them in Canada. And they're gene edited, and it says GM greens will likely be marketed as being more nutritious than lettuce. Nothing is being said about them being labeled as being GM. So that's something that in the future you might have to start being very cautious about when you're buying your seeds, is buying an older variety, an open pollinated seed might be more reliable in the sense that it hasn't been fiddled around with. That's all I can say. But if you come up with something like this and it says it's new and improved something, you know, it's not happened yet, this is, for all we know, is the first, but it's something to be very aware of.
How can they legally get away with not saying what it is?
Because there's no law
I mean, they're not,
against it.
well,
Yeah.
it's been sort of a
The laws
gentleman's
usually end up
agreement, sort of, but.
Laws usually end up having to be made to catch up.
Yeah.
And then in the meantime, like until they catch up, there's a few things that slip through, but.
So, yeah, it's something to phone up on the internet or in publications, talk to your neighbors about, talk to your elected representatives about if you're concerned. Eventually it percolates up and hopefully becomes a law. As I've said, other parts of the world have more stringent laws than we have. We really are catching up on this.
You can also, if you have something that you really want to buy and you're if you have a question about it, then contact the company that's selling it.
I would think they should have to tell
They
you,
should have to tell you that.
you know,
Yeah, there's no reason they wouldn't tell you.
this is the reason why they won't put it on this.
Yeah, industry-wide pressures.
And it's sort of the Canadian Grain Commission, what I do know is that there were 3 crops that were certified for export GMO, and that is soybeans, corn, and canola. There was an accident that they had with some experimentation with tripid flax, and because of that, flax, canola, soybeans, and corn are all very, very strictly monitored. And when they ship them, processed, if they have the 2 different non-GMO or and a GMO stored in the same facility, they have to flush the system, everything has to be purified and cleaned out so that there's no cross-contamination, because Europe has 0 tolerance for GMO. So I just thought, those particular 4 crops, we had a very strong flax monitoring, protocol in place, because that triplet got accidentally somehow made it into the system. Very hush-hush about how that happened, but now they figured that they caught it all. And, they don't monitor the flax as closely as they did, because they figured that now that trivet has been eradicated.
Oh, good, interesting story. Yeah, market pressures, you know, the EU not accepting GMOs caused a lot of expense for some people that were creating them, so we need more of that to happen if we're concerned about that.
So, my dear, I guess that's it.
I think
For
there's-
us, for the talk part.
Yeah, that's it.
If you, are there any questions?
Did we have, I forgot if this was in the handout, I believe it is, the seed viability, probably the last page of your handout. It's just,
Longevity?
yeah, keep that with you, that's, we find that very handy, if you are, you know, forgive us for giving a talk that is so oriented to seed saving, but that's what we do. And, that gives you an idea, if you are saving seeds, how long they will last, that's if they're kept,
Did you not get one of these?
fairly dry.
Other extras of this copy?
If there aren't enough, the librarians can offer you one, yeah.
We'll get one for you.
Yeah, are there any other questions? We've got, sort of a soft launch of our seed sales for this year. If you're looking to buy some seeds, we've changed our protocols a little bit. We're not selling them in packets anymore. We're selling them still in packets, but you can packet your own from the bulk containers that we have. That allows you to see the seeds, feel the seeds, smell the seeds, enjoy the seeds, and hopefully buy the seeds. And we'll be around at various community events this year with our seeds. You can always visit our website to see where we're going to be, and we've got a list back there for our email list. If you'd like to join our email list, we'll let you know where we'll be and other events that we're doing and talks and whatnot. So, thank you so much for
Thank
coming.
you.
Thank you.